The air inside the Ketran cruiser was thick with the smell of incense and metal polish, a cloying mixture that reminded Dr. James Vinton of a veterinary clinic whose owners were a little too fond of lavender air fresheners. Not that this particular space belonged to a clinic, it was the warship Zarek's honor, pride of the Ketran military and current host to a very agitated set of alien warriors. James adjusted his bag, the strap biting into his shoulder, as he scanned the chamber. A ring of tall, broad-shouldered Ketrans surrounded him, their crimson and gold exoskeletal armor gleaming under the harsh overhead lights. Their antennae twitched in irritation, an instinctive gesture that James had learned to interpret as mild contempt mixed with curiosity. And this is the human one of them barked, its mandibles clicking loudly. This soft creature is supposed to save the Varrash. James raised a hand in a mock wave. Hello, yes, the soft creature is here to help. I assume you're the welcoming committee. A ripple of laughter spread through the group, though it was more derisive than amused. The warrior who had spoken, a particularly imposing Ketran with gleaming yellow chidon and a ceremonial crest shaped like a jagged crown, stepped closer, looming over James. I am Commander Zevor, he announced, and I find it difficult to believe that a species as fragile as yours could offer anything of value to us. James shrugged, unfazed. Yeah, I get that a lot, but you called for help, and here I am. Now, where's the patient? A murmur passed through the crowd. Zevor's antennae stiffened, and his mandibles clicked together in what James interpreted as frustration. You do not understand, human, Zevor growled. The Varrash is no mere patient, it is our sacred beast, the protector of our lineage and the heart of our warrior culture. If it dies, your entire civilization collapses, everyone mourns for 1,000 years, and someone probably writes a tragic epic about it. Got it, James interrupted. But if you'd like me to have any chance of saving this creature, I'm going to need to see it. Zevor's eyes narrowed, the multifaceted orbs reflecting James's image in a dozen distorted fragments. You have the arrogance of a Ketran, he said slowly. Perhaps that is why my superiors allowed you here. Follow me, if you dare. The warriors parted to make way for James, their derisive snickers following him as he trailed after Zevor. The journey through the Zarek's honor was an exercise in both physical endurance and patience. The ship's corridors were clearly designed for being significantly taller and sturdier than James, and he found himself ducking under low-hanging bulkheads and sidestepping jagged protrusions that seemed to serve no purpose other than to snag unwary travelers. Zevor didn't bother to slow his pace, and James had to jog occasionally to keep up. Finally, they arrived at a massive set of doors adorned with intricate carvings depicting Ketran battles and what James assumed was the Varrash itself, a monstrous, quadrupedal creature with razor-sharp claws and a mane of flames. The doors slid open with a low rumble, revealing a cavernous chamber bathed in dim, red light. In the center of the room lay the Varrash. James had seen his share of exotic creatures during his time as a vet, but the Varrash was something else entirely. It was enormous, easily the size of a small shuttle, with a sleek, obsidian black body that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its limbs ended in clawed appendages that could probably tear through starship hulls, and its head was crowned with a pair of spiraling horns that glowed faintly. The beast was breathing slowly, its massive chest rising and falling in labored motions. A series of strange, golden growths protruded from its sides, pulsing rhythmically like infected sores. James let out a low whistle. Well, you weren't kidding. This thing's a big deal. Zevor crossed his arms. The Varrash was wounded during a battle with the Zorak, a rival clan whose treachery knows no bounds. Their venom has infected its bloodstream, and none of our healers have been able to jamist its spread. And that's where I come in, James said, dropping his bag and kneeling beside the creature. He reached out cautiously, his hand stopping just short of the Varrash's hide. The heat radiating from its body was intense, like standing too close to an open furnace. You should not touch it without proper reverence, Zevor warned. James ignored him and pressed his fingers gently against the beast's side. The texture of its skin was surprisingly smooth, almost silky, but he could feel the feverish heat beneath. The golden growths twitched under his touch, and the Varrash let out a low, rumbling growl that reverberated through the chamber. "Okay, big guy, let's see what we're dealing with," James muttered, pulling out a small scanner from his bag. He ran the device over the creature's body, watching as the screen filled with data. Zivor loomed behind him, his mandibles clicking impatiently. "What are you doing, human?" "Figuring out what's killing your sacred beast," James replied. He pointed at the golden growths. "These are the problem. They're leaching nutrients and energy from its body, which is why it's so weak. If we don't remove them, it's not going to make it." "And how do you propose to do that?" Zivor demanded. Carefully, James said, standing up and stretching. "But first, I'm going to need some supplies and a whole lot of cooperation from you and your crew." The Ketran warriors burst into laughter, their antennae waving wildly. One of them, a younger soldier with green-tinted chitin, stepped forward and sneered. "You think you can succeed where our greatest healers have failed? What arrogance!" James shrugged again. "Arrogance or not, I'm your best shot. Now, are you going to help me, or should I start writing the Varrash's obituary?" The laughter died down, replaced by uneasy murmurs. Zivor's antennae twitched, and he glared at James with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "Very well, human," he said, "but if you fail, you will bear the weight of our wrath." Noted, James said, already making a mental list of the tools and equipment he'd need. "Let's get to work." James stood at the center of what he could only describe as a Ketran war council, though it looked more like a meeting of armored ants who had just been told their anthill was on fire. The warriors surrounded a holographic table projecting a detailed 3D model of the Varrash. "This human," one of the senior warriors growled, "expects us to take orders from him? Zevor, are you certain the High Command has not gone mad?" The hologram flickered as Zevor slammed his clawed hand down on the table. "Enough, Torvik. The High Command decreed the human would lead this endeavor, and we will obey, no matter how ridiculous it seems." "Appreciate the vote of confidence," James said dryly. He set down a crude sketch he'd made of the tools and materials he needed. "First things first, I'm going to need something sharp but delicate. Your ceremonial blades seem decent, but they're about as subtle as a sledgehammer. Do you have anything finer?" A younger warrior with mottled blue plating snorted. "What, like a needle for stitching hides? Perhaps we should also fetch you a sewing basket, human." Laughter rippled through the room, and James sighed. "Right, I get it. I'm the big cosmic joke today. But unless you want your sacred beast to die of sepsis while you all have a chuckle, maybe let me do my job." Zivor silenced the group with a sharp wave of his arm. "Fetch the human what he needs," he commanded. One of the warriors stalked off, muttering curses under his breath, while James continued his list. "I'm also going to need sterile liquids. Your water seems full of heavy metals, which is cool for you but bad for me. Anything purified will do. Oh, and if you've got anesthesia or a sedative strong enough for the Varrash, bring that too. Last thing we want is it waking up mid-surgery." The warriors exchanged uneasy glances, their antennae twitching in unison. Zevor stepped forward, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "The Varrash cannot be sedated," he said. "Its metabolism is too powerful. Any sedative strong enough to affect it would likely kill it." "Of course it can't," James muttered. "Because why would this be easy?" He rubbed his temples and ex-Jamesed. "All right then, plan B. I'll need restraint strong ones. Something that can hold down a creature capable of ripping through starship hulls." "That we can provide," Zevor said. "Great. Also clear the chamber of anyone who doesn't need to be there. The more crowded it is, the more likely something goes wrong. And trust me, you don't want me to screw up." Zivor hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave the chamber unguarded, but finally nodded. "Very well, human. But know this: if you fail, you will not leave this ship alive." James shot him a crooked grin. Yeah, certain doom and all that. I got it. Now let's move." Hours later, James stood in the now-cleared chamber, surrounded by an array of alien tools that only vaguely resembled the medical instruments he was used to. He'd sterilized what he could with a makeshift chemical solution, and had spent the rest of the time triple-checking his plan. The Varrash lay on a reinforced platform, its massive body held down by a network of thick, energy-dampening straps. The beast's breathing was James low but steady, and its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. James donned a pair of gloves that were too big for his hands but would have to do. "Okay, big guy," he murmured. "Time to see what you're made of." He approached the first golden growth, a bulbous mass that pulsed faintly with an internal rhythm. Using a delicate scalpel-like instrument, he made an incision around the base of the growth, careful not to disturb the surrounding tissue. A viscous, black liquid oozed out, releasing a pungent odor that made James gag. "Lovely," he muttered, wiping the fluid away with a sterile cloth. He carefully removed the growth, severing the tendrils that anchored it to the Varrash's body. The beast let out a low growl, its muscles tensing against the restraints. "Stay with me," Buddy James said, his voice calm, despite the sweat dripping down his face. "Just a little longer." One by one, he removed the growths, each extraction more difficult than the last. The golden masses seemed almost alive, writhing and pulsating as if trying to resist his efforts. James's hands were steady, but his heart raced with every cut and stitch. Behind him, the door to the chamber hissed open, and Zevor entered, flanked by two warriors. They stopped just inside the threshold, watching in silence as James worked. "He still lives," Zevor murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Barely, James shot back without looking up. "Your sacred beast is tougher than it looks, but it's not invincible. If you've got prayers or rituals or whatever, now's the time." Zevor's antennae twitched, but he said nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James stepped back and wiped his hands on his already stained shirt. "That's the last one," he said, his voice hoarse. "The infection should clear up now, but it's going to need rest and a ton of care." The Varrash let out a low, rumbling exclaimese, its massive body relaxing against the platform. The glow in its eyes dimmed slightly, but James took that as a good sign it was no longer fighting to stay conscious. Zevor approached, his expression unreadable. "You have done what none of us thought possible, human," he said. "But the true test will come in the days ahead. If the Varrash does not recover—" I know, James interrupted, waving a hand. "Wrath of 1,000 warriors, etc., etc. Look, I've done my part. The rest is up to you and your beast." Zevor's mandibles twitched, and for a moment James thought he might actually smile. Instead, the commander inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "We James'll see. James Vinton," he said. "We James'll see." James had hoped for a chance to catch his breath after the grueling surgery, but it quickly became apparent that the Ketrans had other plans. No sooner had he packed away his tools than Zevor was barking orders to his warriors, assigning a rotating guard to monitor the Varrash's condition and ensuring that the human did not wander off or do anything foolish. James sighed as he leaned against the wall of the medical chamber, sipping a weak nutrient drink the Ketrans had begrudgingly provided. The Varrash lay motionless on its platform, its breathing slow but steady. For the first time since boarding the Zarek's Honor, James allowed himself a sliver of cautious optimism. And then the alarms went off. A deafening klaxon echoed through the ship, followed by a sharp, metallic voice over the intercom. "All warriors to battle stations. Hostile vessel detected. Repeat, all warriors to battle stations." James winced and looked over at Zevor, who had gone rigid. The commander's antennae twitched furiously as he barked into his communicator. "Who dares to approach the Zarek's Honor?" A crackling response came through. "It is the Zorak, Commander. They have come to finish what they started." Zevor's mandibles clicked in fury. "Prepare the weapons. I will not allow those cowards to claim another victory." James stood up, his brow furrowing. Commander? I don't mean to interrupt your whole vengeance thing, but I'm pretty sure the Varrash isn't battle-ready yet. You might want to hold off on the whole epic space fight until your sacred beast can actually defend itself." Zevor rounded on him, his multifaceted eyes blazing. "Do you take me for a fool, human? I will not endanger the Varrash further. It will remain here, under guard. But the Zorak must be punished for their treachery." "Right," James said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Good luck with that. I'll just stay here and make sure your patient doesn't keel over while you're out playing Space Gladiator." The commander ignored him, storming out of the chamber with his warriors in tow. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving James alone with the Varrash and a pair of stone-faced guards who seemed more interested in glaring at him than doing anything useful. Great James muttered, sinking back into his seat. This day just keeps getting better. The battle didn't take long to reach the ship. The Xeric's honor shuddered violently as the first barrage of enemy fire struck its shields. James gripped the edge of his chair, his heart racing. "What's the plan if this ship gets blown up?" he asked the guards. They didn't answer, their antennae twitching slightly as the vessel trembled again. "Cool," James said. "Love the communication." A sudden, high-pitched whine filled the air, and the lights in the chamber flickered. James glanced at the Varrash, his stomach sinking. The creature stirred slightly, its claws twitching, as if responding to the vibrations of the ship. "Hey, guys," James said, standing up. "I think your sacred beast is waking up." The guards exchanged uneasy glances before one of them stepped forward, leveling a plasma-tipped spear at the Varrash. "Ho, ho, ho," James shouted, stepping between the guard and the creature. "What are you doing?" "If the Varrash awakens in its current state, it may lash out uncontrollably," the guard said. "We must be prepared to subdue it." "Subdue it," James repeated, incredulous. "You're going to stab your sacred beast because you're scared it might throw a tantrum? That's your plan?" The guard hesitated, his antennae twitching uncertainly. "Look," James said, lowering his voice. "I get that you're worried, but stabbing it isn't going to help. If anything, it'll just make things worse. Trust me, I've dealt with creatures way scarier than this." The guard didn't look convinced, but he reluctantly lowered his weapon. "Thank you," James said, turning back to the Varrash. The beast's breathing had quickened, and its eyes flickered faintly. "All right, big guy, let's keep this calm, okay? No sudden moves." He reached out cautiously, placing a hand on the Varrash's side. The creature's body was still feverishly warm, but the golden growths were gone, and the infected tissue had begun to heal. "You're tougher than you look," James murmured. "Let's see if you can keep that streak going." The ship shuddered again, and this time, the Varrash let out a low, rumbling growl. Its claws scraped against the platform, leaving deep gouges in the metal. "Okay, not ideal," James muttered. Guys? Maybe let the commander know we've got a situation here." One of the guards activated his communicator, speaking rapidly in Ketran. James didn't catch most of it, but he recognized the words Varrash and unstable, which didn't exactly fill him with confidence. The beast's growl grew louder, and James took a step back, his mind racing. If it broke free of its restraints, the Varrash could tear through the ship like wet paper. But he couldn't exactly sedate it, and trying to restrain it further would only agitate it. "All right, James," he muttered to himself. "Think. What calms down an angry, semi-divine murder beast?" His gaze fell on a small, portable speaker in his bag, a relic from Earth that he used to play music during long surgeries. He pulled it out, his fingers fumbling as he scrolled through the playlist. "This is probably the dumbest idea I've ever had," he said, selecting a track. The gentle, melodic strains of classical music filled the chamber. The Varrash's growl faltered, its head tilting slightly as if listening. James held his breath. "That's it," he whispered. "Nice and easy." The beast let out a low, rumbling sigh and settled back against the platform, its body relaxing. James exchanged, his knees nearly buckling with relief. "I can't believe that actually worked," he said, shaking his head. The guards stared at him in stunned silence. One of them muttered something in Ketran, which James suspected translated to what in the void just happened. "Yeah, I'm magic," James said, rolling his eyes. "Now let's keep it that way, all right." The Xeric's honor rattled with another impact, and James silently begged the Ketrans to wrap up their space brawl sooner rather than later. The Varrash had calmed down, but the situation was still precarious. Its breathing was steady, its claws were no longer gouging holes in the platform, and its glowing eyes had dimmed back to a dull flicker, but James wasn't about to declare victory. Then came the low, vibrating hum. James froze, recognizing it immediately, a shield generator powering down. The noise came from somewhere deep within the ship, and it wasn't long before the Ketran guards confirmed his worst fear. "The Zorak have disabled our shield matrix," one guard said, his voice sharp with panic. "They'll board the ship within moments." Fan-freaking-tastic, James muttered. What's the plan? Besides, panicking. The guards didn't respond. Instead, they bolted for the door, one shouting into his communicator as they left. James stood there, stunned, before snapping back to reality. Oh great, leave the squishy human alone with the war god. The door slammed shut behind them, and James let out a shaky breath. He turned back to the Varrash, which was now awake and watching him with eerie focus. Okay, buddy, James said, his voice trembling. It's just you and me now. No pressure. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor outside the chamber, heavier and more deliberate than the Ketran guards. James didn't need a translator to know who they belonged to. The Zorak were here. The door hissed open, revealing a group of tall, hulking warriors clad in obsidian black armor that seemed to drink in the light. Their elongated, insect-like faces were twisted into expressions of predatory glee as they scanned the chamber. Well, this is awkward, James said, raising a hand in mock greeting. Welcome to the Sacred Beast's recovery room. Can I help you? The lead Zorak, a brute with jagged mandibles and glowing blue eyes, tilted his head. A human? Here? Yeah, long story, James said, inching closer to the Varrash. Look, I don't know what you're after, but you're not going to get it. The Ketrans already have enough on their plate without you guys stirring up more trouble. The Zorak leader let out a harsh, chittering laugh. You think we fear the Ketrans? Their shields are down, their warriors are scattered, and their precious Varrash is too weak to defend them. This victory is ours. James's mind raced. He had no weapon, no backup, and no way to call for help. But he did have one advantage: the Zorak didn't seem to realize the Varrash was awake. All right, James said, forcing a grin. You win. Go ahead, take the Varrash. I'll even help you load it onto your ship. But, fair warning, it's a bit cranky when it wakes up. The Zorak leader narrowed his eyes. What are you? The Varrash roared. The sound was deafening, a guttural, bone-shaking bellow that reverberated through the chamber and sent the Zorak stumbling backward. The beast surged against its restraints, snapping one of the reinforced straps with a sickening crack. Yep, there it is, James shouted, diving behind a stack of equipment. Told you it was cranky. The Zorak opened fire, their weapons blazing with searing blue energy. The Varrash roared again, its massive claws slashing through the air as it broke free of another restraint. The energy blast struck its obsidian hide, but the creature barely flinched, its fiery eyes locking onto the intruders with terrifying precision. Not how I planned this, James yelled, clutching the speaker he'd used earlier. Not even close. The Varrash lunged, its claws tearing through the lead Zorak with horrifying ease. The other warriors scrambled to retreat, but the beast was relentless, its movements impossibly fast for its size. James watched in stunned silence as the Varrash tore through the Zorak like a force of nature, its wrath unleashed in a flurry of claws and fury. By the time the last intruder fell, the chamber was littered with shattered armor and broken weapons. The Varrash stood in the center of the carnage, its obsidian body gleaming with a faint, golden glow. It turned to James, its fiery eyes locking onto him once more. Good job, James said, his voice trembling. You're a real champ, big guy. A plus effort. The beast tilted its head, then let out a low, rumbling growl that sounded almost content. It settled back onto the platform, its massive body curling into a resting position. The door hissed open again, and Zever stormed in, his armor scorched and dented from battle. He froze at the sight of the destroyed Zorak and the now calm Varrash. What in the name of the stars happened here, he demanded. Oh, James said, slumping against the wall. Just another day in the exciting life of an intergalactic vet. Zivor stared at him, then at the Varrash, then back at the remains of the Zorak. Slowly, his mandibles twitched in what James could only assume was a smile. You are a strange and foolish creature, James Vinton Zivor said, but it seems the stars favor you. James let out a tired laugh. Yeah, well, let's hope they keep it up. I don't think I've got another round of this in me. The aftermath was a blur. The Ketrans repaired their shields, the remaining Zorak fled, and the Varrash was declared stable enough to recover on its own. James was given a grudging but genuine thank you from Zever, who even went so far as to offer him a place of honor in Ketran history. James declined. "Thanks, but I think I've had enough warrior culture for one lifetime," he said, packing his things. "Besides, I've got a clinic full of earth critters waiting for me. Pretty sure Mrs. Peterson's tabby cat is a bigger menace than your Zorak anyway." Zevor didn't laugh, but his antennae twitched in what James chose to interpret as amusement. As James boarded the shuttle that would take him back to human space, he couldn't help but glance back at the Varrash one last time. The beast watched him with those glowing eyes, its gaze calm and steady. "Take care, big guy," James murmured. "Try not to get into too much trouble without me." The shuttle door closed, and for the first time in days, James allowed himself to relax. Maybe humanity didn't have sacred beasts or warrior creeds, but they had something better: the ability to survive the impossible with a shrug and a smile. And sometimes, that was enough.